Welcome, everybody. Hope you're having a good week, longer weekend for some of you, first day of the week for some of you. I think if you're joining us from Canada, like it's a national holiday in Canada. It's like Family Day or something, which is cool. But for those of you just joining us today, welcome. I've got Trenton Bodine. Is it Bodine?
Yes, you got it.
Okay, good. I got it.
That was funny.
I screwed that up last time, Trenton. That's why. He's my director of tech. And I've got Tiffany. Tiffany, is it Gelzinis or the Gelzinis? Gelzinis.
Gelzinis. Yeah. It was really close. Yeah.
Tiffany's amazing. She's out of Virginia Beach, Norfolk, and that area. She has a team out there with EXP, and she's the team leader. So she's also the one that's in charge of piecing everything together, and that's what we're going to talk about: creating a database for life, aka Tiffany's brain, which is going to be a great session here. Tiffany, thanks for joining us.
Or a scary session. We'll just have to see in the person, digging into Tiffany's brain. Oh, I don't know.
It's good. Or when it comes, we'll keep it to follow a boss. The brain and follow boss would be perfect.
That's good.
So there are a lot of pieces here inside of a database, and we can start with automation or smart plans or even Zapier. I know you were talking about Zapier, but I'd like to understand first how you started in this process. Where are most of your leads coming in from? What was that problem that you were trying to solve?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how any kind of system starts, is identifying a problem that needs to be solved. And we had leads coming in from a lot of different sources over a fairly long period of time. So I started building the database really in probably 2016, 2017. And I had leads coming in from Zillow and PPC. We have, Ylopo leads. We have all different sources. And I think where we first started identifying that there was a problem with creating a lifelong asset was the first step, in whenever you get a new piece of data is trying to disposition it, right? So as soon as you talk to that lead, you're trying to figure out, is this a viable person I can help buy or sell a house, or which bucket can I put them in, right? And so just that dispositioning of the lead and putting them in buckets, but then once they're in that bucket, they would stay there. And so there's a lot of opportunity in those buckets after, say, a year or 2 years that they need to be addressed at that point in time. So, and actually, can I share my screen? Because I'll show you, I have a visual of this.
Please do, because that is the biggest challenge. We put them somewhere. We're like, okay, we know where they go. And then nothing happens after a while to them.
Right. And what I was finding really, and this is kind of where I'm going to move this into presentation mode. What I was finding was that, even if we were working off of activity, and I know we talk about that a lot of times with Follow Up Boss, and really working those activity lists. So paying attention to the leads that are coming back and doing something that maybe triggers a reason to reach out to them. So, recent logins or why priorities, or they came back after so many days. But what I was finding is that if they were staged in a category where an agent thought they weren't viable, that they would ignore that activity. Well, that stage could have been placed on that lead 5 years ago. So just because they were working with an agent 5 years ago doesn't mean that they can't work with you today. So that's kind of where we started with this process was, gap number one was leads are being put in buckets like they were permanent. And so if you're looking at these categories, and these are just some general ideas, they already bought a house. Okay, well, they're not a lead. I don't need to work with them anymore. I missed that opportunity. Or they're a renter, they're in credit repair, or they were rude to me. That was one of the biggest ones. We had a pond at one point in time where my goal was, don't focus on the people that are not nice to talk to, so get rid of them, get them out of the way. But just because they were rude once doesn't mean that they're not going to be nice the next time. Maybe they got 10 calls from 10 different agents that day, and so they're just like, stop calling me. So that's where we kind of started adjusting this, right? So we adjusted this using automations, and it was kind of like the invention of the life cycle of the life cycle stage versus a permanent stage. So
This is really cool.
Thanks. Thank you.
I like this. Frenton, check this out, bro. This is
I like to have just push
Tiffany.
You can move them so easily.
Yeah, Tiffany, this is really great for us to see visually, to understand that leads are alive. They transition to something else. This is beautiful. Thank you.
Right, exactly. And so just kind of putting together a plan of what happens with somebody right now at this snapshot in time versus how can we provide value in the future to that same person. So we invented life cycle stages, and then we put automations behind those. And I kind of I'll talk a little bit about that too, like what those automations behind them look like. So the first step was we just kind of took those leads out of the agent view, right? So that they could focus on contacting and reaching out to other leads. So we created a pond called paused leads. So if they fit in one of those buckets that's in a temporary life cycle, then they're just kind of taken out of the agent's view. But then we've created automations behind those different stages, like, already bought a house. Well, now we have an automation that after they've been in that stage for a year, then they're moved back into the seller leads pond. So initially we're going to try to get their home address. The first time we talk to them and they say we already bought a house, we're going to try to get them to tell us where they bought. Hey, tell me a little bit more about that. Did you end up buying in Virginia Beach or Chesapeake? And there's probably a couple of people that'll actually tell you their address at that point in time, but a lot of people are like, none of your business, leave me alone. Well, it's a different conversation when you call them in a year, and then you can start to talk to them about an equity report. And they can start to see the value of, you keep an eye on your 401k account to see how that increases and decreases in value over time. Isn't it also a good idea to keep track of your home value and how that increases and decreases over time? And so now you're providing something of value. You're not trying to sell them something. Then you set them up on HomeBot, you set them up on a market report, and now you can start working them based off of activity and, get them invited to your events, those kinds of things. But if they hadn't been staged back to a seller lead, then they would have just been left in that bucket and not worked further, right? Kind of the same thing with renters, and we're very careful. A lot of people that are renting now will figure out, when is your lease up? Are you interested in talking about buying later? And there's other people that are, they're not going to buy anytime soon. But getting them hooked up with awareness about first-time buyer programs, invited to our quarterly events, just staying in front of them, and then later on moving them back to a buyer lead so that they're getting more attention that way as a potential buyer in the future. So that's kind of what started us in this the process of making sure that our database was one that was going to be an asset for life and not just static place where we could sort leads.
I think that's great because most renters within 6 to 12 months are probably going to either be looking to get out of that lease or realize the potential these days of, what's more cost effective, especially since, probably buying a home might actually be a little bit more affordable, especially with some down payment programs and things like that.
Right. And it gives us, using the stages in that way too, gives us the opportunity to cater our drip campaigns to them. What are we showing them? And then of course, staying in front of them with Ylopo through, remarketing and that kind of thing. So this was kind of phase one, if you will.
Okay, good. So let me just add one piece to this.
Yeah.
First off, Tyler says genius, and Tyler, yeah, I agree. Very, very awesome.
Thanks, Tyler.
The thing that is running in my head is it's science, like a little atom. You've got the proton and the electron. It's like when you heat it up, it gets excited. Now I'm thinking it's like, wait a second, the client is the atom. it's never stagnant. It looks like they're
Mhm.
stagnant to us, but the more actions you anticipate that they're going to take, the more you can anticipate what to send to them. And I love that. That's so key. So
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking. Yeah, Tyler was thinking the same thing. Nucleus. So I
Yeah.
think
That's
give that
awesome.
to all of us, Tiffany. That was good.
Yeah, and I mean, it gives you, if you start to really just categorize, especially using stages, and I know I've heard from some people in the past when I've talked to about this system, how they don't want to have but so many stages. But if you can really use your stages as those buckets to break down your leads, you can start catering more and more automation. So once I got into understanding automations, I really started thinking about the database in terms of triggers. And if you're into automations, then you know what I mean, because you're thinking about it. What's the trigger? So every little broken down piece, whether it's a pond, it's a tag, it's a stage, we're thinking about it, using it as a trigger. And how can we layer those triggers to be able to do more with our leads through automations, right? So it might be a stage that starts the trigger or that starts an automation, but then it's a tag later on that pivots it somewhere else. So really starting to think about triggers. And I want to put this out here, you guys, because if there's somebody, I've been in the seat of sitting on a webinar and hearing people talk about triggers and automations and feeling like I'm being completely overwhelmed and just not understanding what people are even talking about. I'm not a very high tech person. I'm really not. Like I'm not a computer programmer. I'm not somebody that fully understands all of the tech side of things. But what I understood was the problem. And once I understood the problem, and then I started laying out what would an ideal solution look like how can I solve this problem? Then slowly but surely I could kind of piecemeal those things together. And with the help of some of the great people at Follow Up Boss too, figure out how to make these things happen. So I'm not a tech person. So just wanted to put that out there.
I like that. But you've taken the time to understand this process. So tell me now, we understand somewhat of the follow-up stages, right? Because they're a little bit different for some people. But as we get into that, what would be the smart list that we put them into?
Yeah. So as far as the temper, so we use Barry Jenkins and Gabe Cordova, the smart list for follow-up. So basically with our stages, we ended up with either people are in those temporary life cycle stages, which are the ones where we're going to automate them out of those stages over time, or they're in a communication plan. And so the communication plan is we basically use the same smart lists of, hot, A, B, C, and we actually added D and E to that so that we know the cadence of how frequently we want to be following up with somebody. So that's how our smart lists are built out for our follow-up plans. But then something that we've recently added is, and so let me move back a little bit. So the follow-up cadence, once an agent has had a substantial conversation with a lead, was easy, right? So once we could categorize them as hot A, B, C, D, then that was easy. They just cleared their smart lists every week. Okay, call your hots every 24 hours, call your A's once a week, call your B's every 2 weeks. That's easy. Keep doing that, right? Clear your smart list. The next gap we identified in the database was the follow-up plan for new leads coming in. So these are the ones that no one's talked to yet. So they're not on a communication plan. They're not a hot A, B, C yet. They're just a lead still. And we know statistically, I believe the statistic is it takes 11 contact attempts to convert a lead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do we make sure those 11 contact attempts happen? And for me, I really didn't want to go back to a task. Oh my goodness. Sorry. I didn't want to go back to a task-based action plan where I had, my agents having to check boxes on they completed a task. I wanted to keep us on smart lists. Just clear the list every day. That's all you got to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what created our the next problem that we needed to solve, which was trying to put all of our lead follow-up for conversion on one smart list. And this is where our automations and our zaps got a little bit more complicated.
All right. Show us.
So
I'd love
I can show you a little bit more about that.
Yeah. As you're going to show us, Roxana says, who helped you with the automation for your follow-up process?
I did a lot. I had an intern that helped me. But I figured out a lot of it myself.
As we're thinking through, because I think it's easier for people to listen in and be like, I could just never get started on this, right? Because you have two levels of people here. One that's kind of towards the beginning, and then ones that are really advanced, right?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I would say that if you're at the beginning, like if you're starting where I started with automations and Follow-Up Boss was really just using the automations that are within Follow-Up Boss. So go into the automations when the stage is changed, then do this following thing, assign an action plan. And then you can kind of start to build on those over time once you understand. And again, step one, understand triggers. So what causes something to start happening? Stage changed, tag added. Those are triggers. Once you understand what begins the process, and then you have to think through what dominoes do you want to fall, then it's easy to piecemeal everything together, right? So if you're just getting started using automations, I would just highly recommend sitting down with a piece of paper and saying, in an ideal world, if I was working this lead from start to finish in the best way I possibly could, this is what I want to happen. This is how I would want it to go. And then you can start building those pieces out over time. Because especially if you're running a team, what you know is that nobody works leads the same way that you did, right? Like when you were working lead generation, when you were the one converting them, none of your team agents work on the same way that you do. But if you can write down what you do and then figure out how to piecemeal all that together, it makes a huge difference.
That's so true. I think just writing it out too on paper. Like, what do you want to happen first? Like literally write it down. And then you can put it onto a Google Doc or anything. And then it becomes clear. You're like, oh, that's what I want. And then you can at least jump onto a phone call with FUB, right, on the back end and be like, this is what I want to do. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, it's easy. Hold on. Boom, 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 boom. So
and start using it. It really is. And start using a community. I mean, I had so many conversations with Albert Vasquez, once I started talking with him and seeing all of the beautiful things he was building, like, oh, okay, there's a lot of capability here. Well, why don't I just call him and ask him how to do this? But we all like to geek out on this stuff. So, reach out. I'll help you, but at least help you get started. It's fun. So, So the next thing was, like I said, kind of lead conversion, right? That was the next gap that we found was identifying the gaps in our follow-up. So some of this I've already said, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but the follow-up procedures they relied on agents filtering data. And each agent wanted to filter the data differently, and some agents were better at it than others. And we have created smart lists to help filter those leads and help them find the low-hanging fruit. And they spent a lot of time looking for that low-hanging fruit, but then other opportunities were just ignored. So, for example, if somebody's not in there, like let's say, for example, they're a Realtor.com lead and they spend all of their time looking at houses on Realtor.com, then they're not going to trigger the activity through your IDX website. They're going to keep going back to Realtor.com. They're going to be that person. I mean, we've all had those leads that send us links to Zillow and links to Redfin and whatever else, like they're not looking at your site. So you've got to, how are you going to find that low hanging fruit that way? So then we kind of started thinking, and I made this the header of this slide because I think every single person that actually is employed by me starts to have a panic attack or rolls their eyes at the very least when I say it would be really cool if. And that's like, you know what would be really cool? It would be really cool if. And that's kind of where a lot of things start, right? So it's like, it would be really cool if we had one list for agents to work through. So they only had to think about one thing. And it would be really cool if the low-hanging fruit was mixed in with the lead follow-up process, so that when agents are prospecting, they're getting a good mixture of reaching out to leads and getting that low-hanging fruit that actually wants to talk to them. So it feels more rewarding, when they're prospecting.
Sure. It burns less people out.
Yes. Yeah. If people are answering the phone and they're having conversations and they feel successful when they're prospecting, they're going to spend more time doing it. Whereas before we just found that agents would just call through ponds. They would start at the beginning and go through, versus having any kind of system behind who they're calling and why, if that makes sense.
Totally. I love that.
Yeah. So then we just had to kind of start to think about how we were going to build it. And building one list that really incorporates multiple filters is a little bit difficult to do in Follow Up Boss. So I will start with how we laid it out. So kind of just like what I said, is I started writing out, what would it look like if I were following up with a lead from start to finish the way that I would want it to happen. And then started to translate that into call count, text count. And we deploy a double dial text. So when you're seeing it, and this wasn't meant to really be able to read very well, but if you're double dial text, as soon as a lead comes in, then ideally, if they didn't answer or respond, you reach out to them again 6 hours later, right? And then you do it again the next morning or what have you, 12 hours later. So kind of just started building out, what would that look like as far as the number of calls and texts, and how many days would you do what for? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I just have a question here. When we're looking at this cadence, is it also lined up with the smart list so that it pops up at the very front so that people could just get rid of it fast? Boom, 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 done. Okay, got it. Oh, yeah. Boom, it popped up. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So what puts it on the smart list, and I do I get into this, and actually we're just going to skip ahead really quick because I want to show you these tags. So this is the filter for the smart list, right?
Oh, I like that.
So if you're looking at, and there's more tags that you can't see below because this goes out to like 300 and something days, right?
Ooh, quick question.
Yeah.
Money pond versus the ocean. Explain that to me, because I know people are going to ask.
Sure. So all of our leads are in the money pond for the first 10 days after they register in our system. So if they come in as a new lead, they're in a money pond for 10 days. So we work a pond system, so we don't assign leads to any agents. All of our agents work out of the ponds until they've had a substantial conversation. And then once they've had a substantial conversation, they claim that lead, and then they take responsibility for them. After 10 days, and this was actually one of the first automations that I ever built, really, was after 10 days, built an automation that the lead would be automatically moved to the ocean. So the ocean is just the holding place for everything else. So those are kind of our two main ponds.
I like that. Those are cool.
I like the names of them too.
Me too. I was thinking a pond full of fresh water fish, and then the ocean full of salmon, wild salmon. It's like I'm very visual, so I'm thinking all these things as I'm talking to Vinny. I'm like, this is cool, very cool.
That's good.
Science to the wild.
There you go. You got to keep it entertaining, especially when you're talking about tech stuff. But yeah, so all of these tags, all the tags are what that's what creates the filter that puts them on that one smart list, so that agents are just calling through that one smart list. And the goal is for them all, like, clear the list. Like if you've got 10 agents working off of clearing one list, and those leads over time are repopulating. And that's what I'm going to kind of get into with these flow charts, so you can kind of see how that looks. Like, how does it go from 6 hours to 18 hours and what happens in between that? And then the last call more than 2 hours ago, that's a pretty good data point as well, because what I don't want to happen is I don't want leads getting, 5 calls in a row just to be taken off the list. I want it to be more spaced out. So once they've had one call, they're moved off. Then another agent starts prospecting in the afternoon. They can try to call again, but at least put some separation between getting that call count done. So it's not all happening really at a short time span, right?
Yep, makes sense. I love that.
So I'll go back up here. So the first step was kind of laying out that cadence, right? Like, what do I want it to look like? And then figuring out how to build it to go on that list with the tags. So this list is tags.
Show us that crazy web that you skipped through already. That one.
Oh, I went ahead and I'm going back. So we're talking about,
Show us explain this beautiful thing.
Yeah. So this was, so there are 2 zaps that really build out the smart lists. And then there are some action plans within Follow Up Boss that kind of help with that. But so kind of just start with is a new contact comes in, right? So that's the trigger. Well, if a new contact, yep, that's the top of the pyramid there. So new contact comes in, that's your trigger. So step 1 is going to be, is that because you can add new contacts for a variety of reasons, right? You manually add a vendor, or you have one of your agents add their sphere. Well, first thing I want to see is I want to filter whether or not it's in my money pond. Because if it's coming into my money pond, then I know it's one of my lead sources, not something that an agent's adding. So that's step 1 is let's run this filter. Yes or no, is it in the money pond? If the answer is no, then it stops. It doesn't continue, right? If the answer is yes, then a tag is going to be added to that lead. Any tag that I create in Follow Up Boss, I always put a hashtag in front of it. It just separates things out that I create versus some of our systems, like Ylopo or Sierra or any of our other systems create on our behalf. So that's just a little hack for me, because I want to be able to separate those tags. So if it is in the money pond, then the tag new is added. And that new tag right there adds it to that smart list, right? So again, the goal is to add the tags to put all of those leads onto that one smart list. And the tags are the linchpin there, right? The next step is the 6-hour delay. So we're going to delay for 6 hours. And during that time, there's some other things going on in the background, which I'm going to show you with the second zap. But the first zap, like the goal of this is literally just to add those timestamps. Just keep adding the timestamps. So you got your 6 hour, you got your 18 hour, then 30 hours, but it's literally just going through and adding those timestamps. And then the timestamp tags, so this one's 6 hour, right, is going to trigger another zap. And that's going to be what checks our call count and checks our text count and make sure that it hasn't been claimed by an agent, right? So if somebody's talked to it, then I don't need it going on the smart list anymore, because now it's being taken care of with our follow-up plans and our communication lists.
You got it.
If they haven't talked to them, that's when it needs to keep going on to the smart list. So, so this is step 1. Then after you figure out how to add all your timeline tags, now you have a zap that's triggered by that timeline tag. So the trigger here is the tag hashtag 6 hour, right? Mm-hmm. So in this situation, and this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, is you have paths. But the first thing, and this one is really important, because without the webhook get, you're looking at old data. And for those of you that are like super sophisticated with tech and with automations, you're probably sitting there going, yeah, duh, Tiffany, that's so obvious. But this was a huge learning experience for me, was the figuring out the webhook piece. Because if you don't do the webhook, then you're not looking at the current, accurate data from Follow Up Boss. So basically, to put it in as close to layman's terms as I can, it's like hitting the refresh button.
Yeah.
That's what the webhook does.
That's a really good point, Tiffany. And yes, this is being recorded. It'll go into our Follow Up Boss YouTube channel. Just put in the link so you can pause it at any time. But if you do want to take some snapshots right now, go right ahead. This is great. You are going to need to add Zapier to your arsenal. It's an extra cost if you want to do more than, I forgot how many Zaps, like 2 or 3. So definitely look into that, but it works really well with Follow Up Boss.
Yes. And once you get familiar with Zapier and what the capabilities are, you will figure out more ways to use it. I promise. It will become a very good tool in your toolbox.
Yes.
And some of the different add-ons. So I think webhook is one of them. You have to have a paid plan in order to use webhooks. I think. So I'm not 100% sure, but anyway, just kind of a data point there. But Zapier is a great plan. So after the webhook, after you refresh your data with the webhook, then in this trigger or in this Zap, you have 2 different paths. So I like to think of paths as an if-then statement. So if this is true, then this happens. But if this is true, then that happens. And that's how, especially if you're just getting familiarized with the terminology of Zaps, if you really just write down how you want your flow to go, like I want this to happen if this is going on, I want that to happen if this is going on, then you can kind of start building those tools out. But paths are the way to do this. And this is actually the symbol in Zapier for adding in paths. So we've got 2 different scenarios where on path 1, if the calls outgoing are greater than 3 and the texts sent are greater than 2, then you're going to apply an action plan through FUB. And all that action plan does in FUB is it takes the 6-hour tag off, which then if that 6-hour tag isn't on, guess what? It's not on the smart list. So the whole thing we're doing is adding and removing tags. That's literally it. And we just have conditions that surround that.
I like that.
Sorry, I completely talked over you.
No. I'm just saying I love this. I hope people are taking notes because they're going to have they're going to have questions for you. So you may have some people reaching out to you.
Sure.
Well.
Happy to help.
Jeremy says paths are for sure on a more expensive plan with Zapier. Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate you. John says, can we get a link to the slides, including in the YouTube comments or follow up? Tiffany, is that something that you offer as well?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll send them over for sure.
Perfect. Let me take a snap of this and I'm going to post it into Follow Up Boss so people can go crazy. Give me a sec.
Yeah. Awesome. So then the second path, right, is the path that says if this is that it hasn't met your rule, right? So we want at this stage of the lead's life for them to have had at least 3 calls and 2 text messages. Well, if they don't have 3 calls and 2 text messages, if it's less than that, then we're going to keep checking back every 2 hours. So at that point, that's where this big, arched arrow goes, is we're going to delay for 2 hours and then we're going to start again. We're going to hit refresh on the data and then we're going to check. Have the calls been made? If they've been made, remove the tag. It comes off the list. If they haven't, the tag stays on and then we're going to check again in 2 hours. So that's just what keeps the list as fresh as possible. And remember, one of the filters on that smart list is that they haven't been called or that the last call was more than 2 hours ago, right? So that's why I have that increment of checking every 2 hours. It's not an exact science. I'm sure that there are some other, things that could come up where a lead gets called more frequently than it should. But I think that is probably the least of our problems. It's usually the opposite of that, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. So, and then this is just, you rinse and repeat, right? So you rinse and repeat. The next one you do is your Zap is triggered by the 18-hour tag. And then you're going to go back to whatever your rules are with your, I created a spreadsheet that has my rules of the number of calls I want, the number of texts I want, and I'm going to make my greater than and my less than be appropriate to those calls and texts. Modify those pads. And one of the beautiful things about Zapier is once you've built out one segment, you can copy it and just build it again. So you don't have to keep putting all the pieces in. You literally can copy your Zap and then just change the pieces that you need to change. For example, the call count, that's it really. And you just build it out that way. So it made it really easy to build these Zaps out for an entire year in no time once we had the framework. Yeah. Yes.
That's a good point, Tiffany. And I don't know that if you haven't done this before that you would know that. So it's good that you're pointing that out, because once you do have the outline, it's easy. It's so much easier to duplicate.
Yeah. And really, this is the outline.
Perfect. Copy. Everyone, take a snapshot.
Yeah. Yes. This is the outline. Now, so it's trigger, refresh your data with your webhook, filter to make sure it's still in your money pond, because we don't want to be adding leads to a list that aren't still in our lead ponds, and then go through your paths. And that's it. And then rinse and repeat. 18 hours, 30 hours, or maybe it's more frequent for you. Maybe you want your leads called every 3 hours. Whatever it is that you want to do, you set up your rules, and then you just adapt the filters to that. And that is pretty much it.
I did.
Did you get all that, Trenton?
Yeah. How many of these do you have?
So we go so the cadence for follow-up increases over time. So the first 10 days, it's, let's see. I think it's the first 3 days that I'm in hours, and then I go to days, right? So then I'm going once a day, doing a check for a period of time. And then I'm going to every 2 days, and then I'm going to every 5 days. So it increases over time. But if I were, let's see, I want to say it's probably around 20 or 25 different tags that then trigger a new Zap. So I at least know that lead is getting reached, put on a list to call that many times in a year. It might be more than that.
You definitely can't miss them then. And you're going to have plenty of touchers that are out there, especially for that 11 or how Tyler mentioned 25 plus now at Follow Bus Con. So yeah, that's great.
Tiffany, question by Diane. Once it's in an action plan for FUB, are the leads still called at a future cadence?
So yes. So once it's okay. So basically, when we're right here and we're saying that they've hit that criteria, right? That they've been called 3 times, texted 2 times. So now we're going to remove that 6-hour tag, right? Mm-hmm. You've got to remember this Zap is still going through and adding in the other tags. So the 18-hour tag, the 30-hour tag, all the way until they're 365 days old. Now, what happens after that, I haven't figured out yet. So, step 2, I don't know. Maybe we keep adding to it.
We'll figure it out. We'll figure
that part out, right? I've got a little bit more time. But if they're, once the tags are removed, or let's say, for example, this filter, the response on this filter is no, that it's not in the money pond anymore. That means that an agent has claimed them, which means that they're on a different follow-up cadence. So they're on a different smart list at that point in time. They're either a hot, an A, a B, a C, a D, an E, or they're in one of those temporary life cycles like we talked about at the beginning, right? And then they're going to come back into our cadence later on. So yes, they are still going to be called, and removing the one tag doesn't stop the other Zap from adding the other tags over time. Hopefully that answered that question.
That did. And then I took a snapshot, posted it onto the Follow Up Boss community, and I put, if you missed the webinar with Tiffany, I'm so sorry. So Uh, I hope that helps
Yes.
because this was good. Look, we don't usually go over, Tiffany, but I needed to give you the extra time because you were in the middle of this process that we needed to finish out. So I love this. Thank you so much. You did awesome.
You. Thanks for having me.
Where would people reach out to you if they have questions or they want to send you a referral for Virginia Beach in that area?
So I will tell you that if you Google my name, I am the only Tiffany Gelzinis that shows up on the internet. So that would be step one. But definitely Instagram, I'm Tiffany_Gelzinis, or Facebook. And or feel free to text me at 757-563-1260.
All right. I love it. Thank you so much. Guys, thanks for
All right.
joining us. This is recorded again. It'll go on our YouTube channel for follow-up busts. Everything's organized there. Just give us about a day. And Tiffany rocked it. I feel like we need to have you more back on,
Sure.
Tiffany, a few times. So thank you for doing this.
Yes. Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me. It was great.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Trenton. Appreciate you, buddy.